Hello, Claire Whelan. Thank you for joining me this morning. Of all my proteges, I've got to say, what's the right word? I'm so proud of you and what you've achieved, and so proud of me for spotting your amazing talent from the get-go. You were kind of basically a runner, but you were so hardworking and so keen to help and so bright. You were kind of producing in the edit suite, certainly, within a year. What do you put that down to, that massive progress?
I think it is working really hard. I think sometimes when you're on the outside, it seems like getting that foot in the door might be the hardest thing. But actually, it's once you get that foot in the door, making the absolute most of every opportunity and saying yes, I think, to as much as you can. I remember kind of not having had my driving license terribly long, and the pool car needed driven back from London, and that was something that was a little bit daunting, but I just kind of had the attitude of just say yes, do everything, and hope it pays off. And luckily for me, I think it depends on the management you have as well, of course. And I was very lucky that people like yourself kind of afforded me opportunities then to progress as well, and just making the most out of those when they present themselves, and diving in head first, I guess.
What advice would you have when it comes to job interview technique for media jobs?
I think my biggest bit of advice for interview technique would be to really, really prepare. That's certainly how I've always approached every interview. And I think sometimes interviews in TV can have the illusion of being perhaps quite casual, or let's meet for a coffee, but I think whether it's a formal BBC interview board or a coffee with a series producer, you need to really, really do your homework, look at the job description, look at what the company's making, think about that particular role and what you have to offer. If there's editorial guidelines to be read those, and just be really, really prepared going into an interview. And I think once you're in an interview, sheer enthusiasm can carry you a long way as well. A lot of it is about the type of person you are as well. And I think if you're really enthusiastic, and sometimes you might get caught on a question you just haven't thought of, and I think just be honest then as well. If it's perhaps a knowledge-based question, saying, well, I've been working on something else, I don't know that right now, but I could pick it up really quickly, or just be honest and treat it as a conversation, but absolutely be enthusiastic. And I think if you've done your homework, it really gives you the confidence then to go in and do your absolute best.
That's such good advice, isn't it, about the editorial guidelines, doing your homework, but being conversational once you're in there. Is really good advice. Now, this workshop is partly about being resilient in the world of television. Tell me what you think are the tough things about working in the media.
I think, like so many things, the tough things are probably the other side of the coin of the best things. It's such a varied and engaging line of work, but that does come at a price. And I think the cost is lack of stability can be a real challenge. Staff jobs are so difficult to come by now, and in a world where short-term contracts are the norm, that can be challenging, both in terms of sort of stress about where the next job's coming from, and also just in the very practical sense of trying to get mortgages, trying to secure a rental property. It can be difficult to be sort of on short-term contracts. And I also think there's no two ways about it. TV can be a very consuming job particularly when you're coming up to broadcast of a program. It can really, it's demanding, and so it can be difficult, I think, sometimes to try and get that work-life balance. And it's not a 9-to-5 job, Monday to Friday, and so that kind of lack of routine can be difficult. I think that those are probably the two biggest challenges when you're trying to balance that with all the things going on in other aspects of your life. So those, I think, are the biggest challenges about a career in TV.
Now, one thing about being resilient in television is coping with challenging bosses. And I know you've had at least one challenging boss, because I was one. Talk about your thoughts on how you handle demanding colleagues. I know you're particularly fantastic at it.
Oh, thank you, Gillian. I think I think demanding, there's a lot of connotations with the word demanding. I mean, demanding in terms of standards, I think it can really do the world of good to just put yourself in the shoes of your producer or your series producer or your exec, whoever's being demanding, and just try to understand, well, what's the reason, what's the motivation there? It's probably not just to give you more work. There's probably a very good editorial reason. And if you're not sure why something needs to be done in a certain way, I'd say ask, because you understand why it needs to be done in such a laborious fashion or such a rigorous fashion. It's usually easier to get on with it then. And similarly, I think if you have a genuinely good idea about how to streamline that process, that would make it slightly less labor intensive but not drop the standards, then vocalize that. I think most people are very receptive to that. And so I think understanding where it's coming from, and generally everyone on the team's working towards the same end goal of making a great TV program, and so understanding that. And in terms of demanding, in terms of time, I do think when you go into kind of a new environment or a new role, it's probably good to just understand, to ask early on, what's the expectation in terms of, if I work a weekend day, will I get paid for that at some point? Will I get that weekend day back in lieu at some point? I think it's fair enough to find out what those parameters are and make sure you're protecting yourself and you're not kind of working weekend days unnecessarily or without getting properly reimbursed. Just ask the question, find out what the policy is, and yeah, then you can feel a bit more comfortable, hopefully, in knowing, well, I'm working this weekend, but I'll get back at some point.
Brilliant. Really good advice. Really good. Well, Claire Whelan, they say that nice folks don't make it to the top, but I'm convinced that you're destined to go all the way to the top just because you're so bright, you're so lovely, and you deserve it for your resilience.
Thank you so much, Gillian.
So thank you for your time this morning, and all the best.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you very much for asking me for my thoughts.